Welcome back to season 5 of Time to Change. I'm Chason Forehand.
And I'm Dom Jones. We have some amazing conversations lined up from people doing the work. I'm excited for those and the change that it'll hopefully spark.
I can't wait to jump in. So let's get started. Boom, right above Irene's left shoulder. It may be on the right side of your screen. It's backwards for me. You'll scan that QR code. Yes, there we go. Scan that QR code, and it will take you right to her book, Choose Your Battles. So let's just get a Reader's Digest version of your background and what you're doing with SPAR.
Well, first of all, we can't get started without me saying what an incredible honor it is to be on your show. You're somewhat of a cult hero, and so I don't really consider myself worthy. But that said, I'm very grateful that you chose me to talk about my story and hopefully inspire others by it. So I would be happy to condense my story into a Reader's Digest, except it looks kind of like the Encyclopedia Britannica, if you're old enough to remember that. It fills many, many shelves. I think what really defined me the most was being from immigrants who taught me very hard work, the value of hard work, the value of ethics, and always say what you mean what you say. Be honest and sincere. And I don't necessarily mean that in a touchy-feely way. I mean, my grandmother was from Russia, for one thing. And it's just that it was baked into me at an early age. And by the time I was in high school, I knew that I wouldn't be satisfied with a desk job or something that wasn't full of excitement, because I was a really hyper kid. I'm still a hyper grandmother. So I picked the Army, and it was a time nobody really bothered to tell me. It was like, hello, women are not welcome here. And that was the branch I selected, which was military police. And in deference to the women who went through beginning in 1983 and had a positive experience throughout, I will say that was not necessarily the case with me. And sometimes I wanted to quit, and usually I didn't. And so it ended up being 31 years of partially awesomeness, seeing exotic places, some of which I don't ever want to go back to. And but on the positive side, meeting people from all segments and walks of culture, society, other countries, the spectrum from wealthy to having absolutely nothing. And this is what formed me, was my personal experience, not the military, but the experience that I had in the military. And I've gone on to serve out a government career after that. And now I own a federal contracting business. But I honestly will say the most time I spent was in the Army, and that was the time that defined me.
Man.
Wow.
Well, thank you for your service.
Yes.
That's for one. And what an incredible book. I'm gonna let Dom ask a question before, so that I don't take up all the time. But I'm gonna read a segment of the book that I absolutely loved, and then get your comments on that. So, Dom, you have anything you want to go through first?
Absolutely. Yeah, and maybe a good tee up to your section, Chason. So, Irene, you had an amazing career in the military. And then, for lack of better words, you had a chance to ride off into the sunset and just consulting career and kind of leave everything behind. You decided to write a book about the realities and your journey, probably not just of yourself, but realities of others as well. What made you feel like this book needed to be written and shared?
Well, first of all, I'm terrified of the sunset. I think when we ride in the sunset, it's kind of equivalent to just dying. So I wasn't going to do that. It has bothered me for some time that I have a unique story, and that I don't think anyone else has my story. And I wanted to get it on paper. I didn't think I was going to write this book that was going to be a good book that people were going to write and say they loved it. I just wanted to get my stories down. And in reflection, there's so many people that I wish would do the same thing. And my sequel will be about other people's stories. But I just had a lot. I felt like I had a lot to say and a lot that others could maybe be inspired by.
Oh, that was good. I do love that. So I have a whole bunch of little, you can't really see this on camera, but I have these color coded little guys so I can go and find my special stuff. Ooh, here we go. Ready for this? See if the bifocals are really working now. In life, we are given a choice to follow trends or blaze our own trails. In my career, I have done both. Sometimes trends seem to work for a while, but ultimately they are just a moment, a flash in the pan that fizzles out. There are leaders and there are followers, but there are also trailblazers. A true path to achievement is not a trend at all. It is a life path. It takes wisdom and courage to forge a direction that will produce longevity and a path for others. One of my favorite, I highlighted it.
Did I write that? I can't remember writing that. The truth of the matter is, I think what I was trying to say is I was true to myself regardless of what room I was standing in. And I know that moving up any ladder, it is not an experience that something that I had that others don't have, to be the only one in a room that looks like you or behaves like you or thinks like you. And when I was the only one in the room, I think it was kind of typical back in the day to be completely overlooked. Like you're trying to raise your hand and the message loud and clear is your opinion doesn't matter here. Just, we used a term in the Army, shut up and color. And I wasn't really good at that. So my battle to pick was I need to walk this razor wire of speaking out when I think it's really important and keeping my mouth shut when I know that it's not going to have an impact in this room. And so those trends I kind of talk about, those are different environments. And the trend that I don't follow is I feel like I'm the same person that I was when I first joined the Army. I feel like all that maturity and all those experience just helped to form what was a better version of me when I first joined the Army. But I really believe in not changing, not saying, hey, I was that person. No, at the soul, at the core, you're the same person. You just kind of go through life and build on the positive experiences and move beyond the negative experiences. So that's kind of what makes me me. I get told a lot, you haven't changed. And I don't know if that answers the 3-part question at all, but it was a stab.
And it's perfectly all right. This is your show. We're talking about you and your book. So I'm perfectly happy with however you want to respond.
Yeah. I'm actually curious for what I hear you saying in your answer, Irene, is that those experiences really just refined. You didn't change. It refined who you are and how you show up a bit.
So as a child, I was always very empathetic. I think we're kind of born with that gene. If there's a bully on the playground, which there always is, now they're on the internet, I was the kid that saw the Down syndrome kid by himself, and it was a he, and befriended him. I was the kid that went to the amusement park on a day in elementary school and hung out with the girl that couldn't speak English at all from Korea because nobody else wanted to. So instead of becoming a journalist, photojournalist like I wanted to, and my father said that I'm not paying for college, I ended up just kind of photojournaling my life. And I'm here's where I'm going with this. When I went to Iraq, I was responsible for overseeing the training of detainee operations as a liaison back to the command that does that training. So I'm at a detainee facility in Iraq at the height of we called it the GWAT, the Global War on Terror. And I'm in that facility, and there are kids in there. And the kids are there because Afghanistan and Iraq there's a very poor population. And those kids would make a little bit of money to lay down a tripwire. And they're going to get some money. And then they go home, and the tripwire ends up loss of American lives. And that kid and his family are going in. But it was hard for me to witness. And same with the women in the society. Every spouse was a woman to a male, going into to request a meeting by video teleconference or in person with their incarcerated, for lack of a better term, detainee. And I actually watched their faces and just saw the anguish in them. And my heart is not big enough for the people who are in the midst of war. It's everywhere now. It's all over the globe. And I just felt like I saw a taste of it enough to appreciate what we have that much more. But to wrap it up, it's empathy. It's empathy that some military leaders have and others do not.
It's interesting because for the longest time, I really was convinced that you can't teach empathy. I mean, I was on that line where I'm not going to get off. You've either got it or you don't. You cannot learn it. I was convinced. And it really is the last couple of years that I have fully changed and done a complete turnaround from that viewpoint. As I listen more to people talk about the aspects of empathy and emotional intelligence. And I think part of it is that, and I feel like I had a decent grasp on what EQ is and what empathy is and some of the differences going in, but I didn't really. And I think this is the thing, even going, whether it's military or whatever leadership group we're talking about, I think there's a lot of people that think they understand what emotional intelligence is and what empathy looks like to them, what it sounds like, what it feels like. But I feel my experience over the last couple of years as I've turned my viewpoint around is that the more I learn, the more I'm unlearning. So I'm going through this process of unlearning, relearning, and retraining, because that's the problem, is we get to this place where we think we know and we're not willing to unlearn anything. And that's dangerous. And I think that's what scares me about leadership behaviors in what I see now. And some of the dumpster fire things that are going on with leadership, past hiring and all of that. So I love that you mentioned that and you're talking about that, because I think you can be born with a boatload more than other people. But I think there are people like yourself that are probably more in tune and just naturally gravitate to being more emotionally intelligent than others. And you talk about you mentioned several things, including the Korean lady that you befriended and stuff like that in your book. But tell me where you feel like we need to go in this learning lesson of emotional intelligence and empathy. Like, how do we get leaders who are stuck and don't even realize that they're stuck, but you can see what's happening in their with their layoffs and how they treat people and their scores on, all of the things. How do we break down those barriers and teach them that there's more for them to learn?
Yeah, getting back to empathy, and I think I brought it up, where I was given the cold shoulder for a long time until we came to a place in our ranks and lives where those arrogant leaders, young junior ones, began to realize that they were not charmed, they were not special, and tragedy struck in their own lives or in the lives of people they know. And when you experience that, the last thing you want is a leader that is not caring and empathetic. I never thought this through. I just thought, I'm going to care for people. They're going to know it. And if you're not like that, maybe you can just observe it and learn from that. I do agree, Chason, that some people are more tuned in than others. There's plenty of documentation on IQ, EQ. And I also agree that there are hundreds of books written on leadership, almost too many, in my opinion, because I don't know how many of them focus on the janitor. I've heard this saying, if the person isn't nice to the janitor, you don't want to hire them. Well, I was being nice to the janitor before I read any of that. And it turned out I ended up working alongside that nonprofit. And that was much later that the janitor belonged to. And I just feel like we should watch ourselves, watch what we say, watch what we do, because we never know when it's going to circle back. I get asked about leadership a lot, and it's hard to cut through all the noise on it because there is so much out there. A lot of it strikes me as being insincere sometimes and more with hubris in mind, rather than taking the time out to care about everybody that's on your team. And if you can't do that in personal ways because your team happens to be 2,000 people, then do it collectively in a group. Do the town halls, do the things that involve food that make everybody happy. We used to have organizational days and picnics, and it just lifts people up, and it goes a long way to understanding that a leader, while they're doing everything they have to do, and that's sometimes delivering bad news or disciplining, that they're always going to be fair and they're always going to be consistent. And that's been my modus operandi. And it got me into sort of investigative work after a while, because I was just really good at treating things similarly, that I didn't treat somebody differently than I treated somebody else. It's just important to treat everyone the same way. Maybe it's overstated. I don't know.
Yeah,
Not at all.
I don't think it's overstated at all. Probably not. Yeah, not enough. I think I heard you say, Jason.
Yeah.
Maybe perhaps a final thought, Irene. You mentioned earlier you wrote this book really because you had stories to tell. You wanted to make sure they were told. There are people that are likely going to pick up this book because it resonates with them and their experience, and they're probably looking to glean something from what you went through. So maybe as a final thought, what is it that you hope to say to people who are navigating environments where they're the other, whether it's a minority, whether it's they just think different and they're trying to find their voice? What is it that you want them to walk away with from your experience?
I want them to know that they're better than they think they are. The amount of self-doubt that goes into being an other in a room, it's so easy to internalize that and say, I'm not good enough. I'll never be good enough. First of all, you're not alone. There's a community out there for you. And that was a lot harder before the internet. But there is a community out there. And if you stay true to yourself and work really hard on that negative self-talk, she said, from years of experience, the important thing is that you try and remain positive. And my final thought is pick up a pen and write your story.
I love that. I love that. We have been on with Irene Glaeser. This is her book, Scan That QR Code, Choose Your Battles. Irene, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for being on the show, and thank you for all that you do and your service. We appreciate you.
And Chason and Dom, thank you for yours. Your heart spreads out far more than mine ever could. So thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege.